So he's the guy who broke the story back in 2000 that Jeb Bush and Catherine Harris actually stole that election for George W. Bush, did it for the BBC. Greg Palast has been doing some amazing investigative journalism work for years and years and years. He's the author and filmmaker of his latest Vigilante. GregPalast.com is his website, Greg_Palast over on Twitter. Greg, welcome back to the program. It's always great having you on, and this is just a shocking story of 300,000 Georgia voters in the crosshairs of Brad Raffson, perjure, and the governor.
And True the Vote. We just had a devastating court ruling on Tuesday. The group True the Vote, a right-wing group out of Texas funded by right-wing billionaires, challenged 360,000 Georgia voters. That's 1/3 Georgia voters back in 2022, and they tried in 2000. In 2022, this was the runoff between Senator Warnock running for re-election. They challenged 1/3 voters. Warnock would have lost, and if their challenges succeeded 2 years earlier, obviously Biden, with only 11,000 vote margin, would have lost. The court ruled, a federal court ruled, that this mass attack on 1/3 voters, and by the way, saying that they weren't eligible, and not one out of the 1/3 voters was found to be an illegal voter. And yet the court ruled that this was not intimidation, despite the evidence that this 1/3 voters were suspiciously, massively, overwhelmingly non-white. In other words, the color blue. And yet the court said this was not intimidation. Now you have to understand, I did this film before the election called Vigilante, Georgia's vote suppression hitman. And in it, we had U.S. military expert on warfare of the future, as he's called, but the Major Gamaliel Turner was assigned by the commander-in-chief to Fort Hueneme in California. And the Republican Party, a vice chairman of the Republican Party, challenged his right to vote and 4,000 others, mainly based around Fort Benning, black soldiers assigned elsewhere. Their right to vote was challenged. Turner said, "Where's my ballot, my absentee ballot here in California?" He's a soldier assigned in California. And they said, "Well, no problem, just fly back to Georgia." This is 2 or 3 days before the election, 2,600 miles, and show us proof that you're an American citizen, Major, and then you can vote.
Oh, God.
And the court said that was not intimidation. Now, and here's the danger, Tom. It's not just the 1/3 voters in Georgia that stand to lose their vote. This is a federal court action which authorizes this group, True the Vote, this right-wing group based in Texas. They are expanding out to Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, you name it. They're out there, and they're going to be now not only attacking the voter rolls of Georgia, but they're starting the challenge to voters' rights in all these key swing states.
Right.
Despite the evidence. And you have to say, and one thing I should note, the case was brought against True the Vote by Fair Fight, Stacey Abrams' group. We had the evidence. I had the confession of True the Vote challengers who said that they got these lists from True the Vote, that they did no vetting. They just challenged these voters. One woman in our film, a GOP operative, personally challenged 32,000 voters. She said she got the names from True the Vote, and she just submitted them and blocked these voters. And yet they were not allowed, Fair Fight was not allowed to put our film into evidence. They tried to put our film into evidence so that they would have the proof that True the Vote was behind this. And they could also see Major Turner confront the vigilante who challenged him. But the court said, no, you can't use that film. I know it's a highly technical thing, but this was devastating to the case.
Which court was this, Greg?
This was unfortunately, it's a federal court in Georgia, and that's what makes it a national, district court. Now,
so this is being, I'm assuming, Stacey Abrams is appealing this to the what would that be, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals?
No, it would be because it's in Georgia, so it'd probably be in the Sixth Circuit. But,
Sixth, okay.
But I don't know if they'll challenge it. I think more important is that I just got off the phone with Major Turner. He's working with the top civil rights voting trial attorney in Georgia, Gerald Griggs, who's president of the NAACP. By the way, he's also the lawyer for the Palast Investigative Fund. And they're looking at other ways to go about it. The major's not going to put down his legal arms. He's going to keep going. This is outrageous.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that soldiers are being denied their vote and told, well, it's not intimidation. Just get on a plane and show up in Georgia.
Right.
You're kidding, right? But I'm very concerned that it's not just a few challenges. What's not being understood here is that this is mass challenging by the hundreds of thousands in states with no backup other than this, you know, pseudoscience, which not incidentally challenges voters of color.
Now this is also based on a law that Georgia that was passed during the tenure of the current governor.
Yes.
And that says that, you know, I lived in Georgia for 13 years. If I was a Georgia resident, I could say, you know, the guy down the street, I'm pretty sure he's not actually an American. You shouldn't let him vote. In other words, I could challenge somebody, and that person then would be prohibited from voting until they proved that they were actually a citizen.
That's correct.
I think when the law was written, they were not anticipating somebody challenging 30,000 people at once in one fell swoop. Although maybe they were. Maybe that was their intention.
Well, actually, here's the bad news.
But my question is, you know, how many other states have laws like this?
Okay. While Georgia's law is particularly egregious, most states have a challenge law that says if you know that someone's an illegal voter, you can block them from voting by challenging them before your Board of Elections.
Right.
But like you say, those laws were implemented or were put on the books when we thought, well, it's one person voting or two. You know, I know Jim doesn't live here anymore. No one should be voting. He died last week. No one should be voting for him.
Right.
Okay. But here you're talking about hundreds of thousands at a crack. In fact, Pam Reardon, the woman who confessed on camera, and again, we couldn't put this evidence into the trial,
right,
but I had her on camera saying, I got this from True the Vote. I didn't vet 32,000 names. She just literally handed in a thumb drive. She said, oh, it's too expensive to print it out. So she handed in a thumb drive with 32,000 voters, including a black woman who lived down the street from her, who she's never met, didn't know, but claimed she didn't live there. 32,000 people from True the Vote. And the Secretary of State, with the governor's approval, under a change in Georgia law under Kemp, said that no board of elections can turn down mass challenges, that any voter can put in, quote, an unlimited number of challenges. That was put in by Kemp specifically to facilitate True the Vote. In fact, the Secretary of State issued a press release thanking True the Vote for their effort in hunting down fraudulent voters.
So here's my question, Greg.
One.
Why don't you challenge the votes of, you know, a couple 100,000 Georgians who live in rural red areas?
Because as Major Gamaliel Turner said, it's not who's on the ballot. Democracy's on the ballot, and democracy should be the rock star. And we should not see if we can have a contest who can be the best vote suppressor.
Right.
We have to fight to let everyone vote.
Yeah, I get it. It seems, though, that might be sufficiently outrageous that it would elevate the issue.
I hope so. In fact, one of the things we're doing is this forcing us to update and expand our film. Mm-hmm. So we'll be doing that and putting that out in fall of 2024. The new Vigilantes, Inc., which, since True the Vote has announced that they're going big national, our film and my work and investigations are going to have to go big national. Yeah. They're taking they're challenging voters in Texas, in Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin. Right. This is real bad news for 2024 unless we straighten it out.
Oh, yeah. And this, I mean, you know, in a way, this started in Arizona. That's where Operation Eagle Eye started with William Rehnquist in the 1960 election, challenging voters, you know, literally standing outside polling places in Native American communities. You know, big bear of a guy, 6'2", 250 pounds. And a lawyer, I mean, he ended up the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, loudly challenging Native Americans and Hispanics, and you know, and what, according to the Arizona law, at least in 1960, if you were, because there were no, you know, rules about ID or anything like that back then, and you didn't even have to show ID unless you were challenged. And if you were challenged, then you had to go home and get your ID. And so he was challenging people, and they would go home and they'd just never come back. So this has a long history. But I'm thinking, if you challenged 500,000 Georgia voters, that would go absolutely, they would go absolutely ape crap. I mean, you know, the right wing would go nuts, and it would get a huge amount of publicity, and it would propel I mean, this story is a total sleeper story. I don't think anybody knows that 360,000 people, you know, this judge just said, you know, 360,000 people can be purged from the voting rolls just because somebody said so. You know.
Well, yeah, he's claiming it's not intimidation.
I mean, isn't it time for some guerrilla theater here?
Well, that's the strategy. I'm just a poor reporter. I can only report on what they're doing and try to get it out, get it into my movies and films and on Thom Hartmann to warn people. I've run a big campaign with Black Voters Matter Fund, NAACP, Rainbow Push, and the other great organizations to try to contact every one of these challenged voters to say, you got to re-register. We had billboards with Rosario Dawson, who's the narrator of our film, saying, check your registration. So we had this massive and successful campaign, which the judge kind of used against the voters, saying, well, you know, probably well over 100,000 voters, after all, did get their registration back. Well, that was a hell of an expensive and difficult campaign for people who already had registered, already had their verifiable right to vote. And now they have to go through this process again, and mainly, frankly, because they're Black. Yeah,
yeah. Well, that's why I would try to compile a list of you know, 500,000 or so white voters in Georgia, in the white communities that are, you know, the upscale suburban communities, the rural areas that are you know, 80-90% voting for Trump.
Well,
anyway.
I can see why angry people would do that, but Major Turner in particular, he's literally put his life on the line.
No, I get
to
it.
defend America's right to vote, and he's not going to challenge someone else's. What he is going to do is keep fighting, keep people aware, and I think that he's looking at other legal action routes, and hopefully there'll be some judges who aren't.
Yep. People can find the movie Vigilante over at gregpalast.com. Greg, thanks a lot.
You're welcome, Tom.